Good afternoon, everyone. So we are going to discuss the questions which have come in the UPSC mains, the modern Indian history part. So 3 questions have come. 2 questions, they are from modern Indian history, and 1 question is an amalgamation of MIH and post-independence India. Right. So see, the first thing that I would like to begin with is, how is it that UPSC always asks new questions? Despite UPSC being there for so many years, how is UPSC able to ask new questions? And how is UPSC able to beat, for example, the so many test series are there, ठीक है, तो जरूरी थोड़ी कि, but फिर भी नया question आ जाता है, why such new questions are there? So basically, there is only one मूल mantra as per me, ठीक है, to clear UPSC, ठीक है, जो मैंने सीखा है, ठीक है, luckily किया भी था एग्जाम क्लियर. तो मूल मंत्र is what? Horizontal and vertical. माने कि we always study each and every subject in a vertical manner, be it polity, be it society, be it history. That means one particular, let's say if we take the example of polity, then fundamental rights, then we study vertically, that this article, this article, this article. History we study vertically, pre-1857 revolts, then 1857 revolts, then post-1857 Indian national movement, socio-religious reforms, we study vertically. And what UPSC does? UPSC asks questions horizontally. So therefore, imagine that you have typed notes of all of your preparation, and then UPSC ask a question, let's say on women. So you do Control F, and wherever women appears, right, that becomes your essay, right? So do a Control F on women from history, you find that, okay, what was the historical struggles of women? Do a Control F on polity on women, you find that how the Constitution of India guards the rights of the women. You do Control F on the laws and schemes, and you find out that how the present laws and schemes, they assist the women. You do Control F on international organizations ke notes, there you might find out some organizations or some work by the international organizations in favor of the women, be it United Nations or be it any other organization, and therefore you'll be able to write essay. The language of the essay can be this or that, but ultimately content will come from here only. And therefore, this is what the theme of the modern Indian history is today. So therefore, that's why if a student always focuses on the why, if the student always focuses on simplifying the complex English language, breaking it down into Desi language, relating it to our day-to-day lives, if international relations are there, so therefore look at relations between your family and the neighboring family. In international relations, it is said, my neighbor's neighbor is my friend. It is there also. ऊपर से पानी टपक रहा है, मैं दुखी हूं अपने नेबर से, ठीक है, और उसका नेबर उससे दुखी है. So therefore, we both can come together and do chugal. So neighbor's neighbor is friend, right? So basically, why? The purpose is what? The purpose is simple, that can we simplify it down? Can we get rid of the complex English? Can we get rid of all of these things? And can we see it in our daily lives? Why? Because ultimately, nation is summation of people who feel one, nation is summation of families, and therefore the way nation behaves, the very similar ways families and neighborhoods also behave. Anyways, coming down to the core topic. So for example, if we take up the first question, question number 2 has come, which states, why did armies of British East India Company, mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, win consistently against the more numerous and better equipped armies of then Indian rulers? Give reasons, right? So therefore, here what is the theme? Theme is, till now, by following the past year questions of UPSC, trying to follow the shortcuts, students, they came out with this thing that UPSC asked mains questions only post 1857. At max pre-1857 revolts. But apart from this, pre-1857 for the prelims and post-1857 for mains, right? But यूपीएससी ने ऐसा कहीं लिखा तो है नहीं, तो यूपीएससी ने पूछ लिया, ठीक है, यूपीएससी ने पूछ लिया. And there, what till now students, they used to do rote learning, right? That okay, Anglo-Maratha, you begin with, for example, Battle of Plassey 1757, Battle of Buxar 1764, then you deal with the Carnatic Wars, 3 Carnatic Wars from 1746 to 1763. Then you talk about, let's say, First Anglo-Maratha War 1775 to 1782. Then you talk about the First Anglo-Mysore War 1766 to 1769, Second Anglo-Mysore War 1780 to 1784, Third Anglo-Mysore War 1789 to 1792, Fourth Anglo-Mysore War 1798-99. Then you talk about Second Anglo-Maratha War 1803 to 1805, Third Anglo-Maratha War 1817 to 1819, Sikh War 1845, Second Sikh War 1849. Right, Burma War 1823-1824, blah, 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 blah. ठीक, and like this rote learner, ठीक है, बस पढ़ लिया ठीक है, that's it. But here, what do you focus upon? A student would have, who would have focused upon that, okay, this is a war, what are the reasons for the war? And what are the consequences of the war? In simple terms, I need to understand that. So therefore, only that student would be able to answer this particular question. Right? So through vertical studies of the wars are there, the student who is focusing on one particular theme, that why are the Britishers winning? It's a very natural, curious question which would come to your mind. Bhai, aisa ho kya raha hai that we are losing? Right? And this thing is also there, that the British Indian Army, it is having sepoys. So kya hai? Lack of nationalism hai, kya reason hai? The student who would have focused upon this would have been able to find out. So what is the answer to this particular question? First aspect that comes into operation is, for example, if you focus upon what you call as interlinkages of the topics. So we are discussing question number 2, interlinkages of subjects. So as a student, I compare world history and I compare world history and I compare with Indian history. And I find out that in the case of China, the Britishers, they did not try. There were other reasons also, but the Britishers, they did not try to conquer China the way they conquered India. And this part is part of world history. And one of the reasons was existence of a strong central authority for the whole of China. Then I see that in the case of Japan, Meiji Restoration 1868, Japan tried to do what? The first thing that it tried to do to escape colonialism by the foreign powers was to establish a strong central government through the Meiji Restoration of 1868. And then I interconnect this, if I'm studying as a student, this thing is not to be done in the exam, right? This thing, if it happens in exam, fine. But at least during course of preparation, we should focus upon this. In 1686, first instance when the East India Company tried to fight the Indians was 1686 when it targeted the Mughal army. And at that point of time, Aurangzeb was present, right? And Aurangzeb was a strong central ruler, right? That means the Mughal army was still strong, right? So we are talking about the military capability here. And there the East India Company, it lost and it realized that they have committed a mistake, right? It is a separate matter that Aurangzeb pardoned them. He was दूरदर्शिता उस तरीके से उस प्रकार से नहीं थी, right? But there also we saw that whenever there is a strong central authority, the East India Company is on the back foot, right? And then as part of our syllabus, you would have studied about decline of Mughals, that is decline of central authority from 1707, right? You would have studied that how after 1761, decline of the mighty Marathas is taking place after the third battle of Panipat, because after 1740, Mughal power was nothing. Everything was the Maratha power. The top all India power was the Maratha power. Would they decline? And see, this is coinciding with the rise of the East India Company. 1757 Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar 1764, and all the battles are taking place after that, right? So therefore, one of the aspect that comes into operation is in the exam we are going to simply write down that introduction can be basically summary of our answer. So introduction, it can be, it can be a summary that summarizing all the things, right? That you can mention that British East India Company British East India Company raised its own army beginning 1750s, and much of it and all of this army or most of this army consisted of the Indian sepoys. Yet, Indian sepoys, while on the other side there were multiple Indian rulers with large armies, still East India Company won all or most of the wars. Following are the reasons. So this can be a simple introduction, right? So therefore, see, if in the exam, if you're not able to find an introduction, two easy methods are there. One method is you simply rephrase the question. जो उन्होंने बोला है वो आप बोल दो different language में. हो गया introduction. ठीक. Second is, if you know your answer, then write the summary of it in 3 lines, and that can become your introduction. And same thing can be there in the conclusion also. If you're able to find some interesting introduction, fine. Otherwise, these are 2 standard simple ways where you're not offending anyone and you're giving out an introduction. So therefore, first component that comes into operation is lack of strong central authority. Lack of strong central authority post 1761. That becomes the first aspect, right? And if you want to elaborate upon it, you can mention, but marks are only 10 and words are only 150, right? So therefore, because इसमें आप simply लिख सकते हैं, since there was lack of strong central authority, therefore Indian armies were divided into multiple armies and there was not one single army the Britishers were fighting, right? Because question में भी वही लिखा हुआ है, more numerous and better equipped armies. Army नहीं, armies, right? So lack of strong central authority means simply common sense है, एक army नहीं है, multiple armies है. Second component that you can mention is that fine, East India Company started developing its army after 1752 onwards. Robert Clive was the main person, वैसे जिसने who built the army. The answer is Royal Military, because Royal Military gave support to the East India Company. East India Company भाड़े पे hire करती थी Royal Military को, ठीक है? That means it used to hire the Royal Military. So yes, EIC army was small, but when you are adding the Royal Military to it, if it is coming from Britain to assist the, plus it is used to be present, Royal Military, Royal Navy used to be present in Indian Ocean also. So when they are coming to assist the East India Company, so therefore that is tilting the balance of power in favor of the East India Company. So therefore second component that comes in, that is the support of Royal Military. That is Royal Military of Britain. And there you can mention reasons that why they were supporting. The first component that comes into operation is, for example, EIC hired it. That is the one aspect, because East India Company hired it. And second component that you can talk about is Britain-France rivalry. Connect world history. What are Carnatic Wars? Carnatic Wars, third Carnatic War, which is taking place around your 1756 to 63. That is nothing but part of the 7-year global war, right? So Britain and France, they are fighting against each other all across the world. So they are fighting in India also. So Carnatic War is nothing but it is part and parcel of the 7-year global war, interlinkage between world history and modern history. So therefore, because Britain is fighting France all across the world, so therefore Britain also wants to fight France in India, and India is important for the trade of the Britishers, and therefore the Royal Military was present in India, right, during the time period of the Carnatic Wars, 1756 to 1763, right? So therefore that is also there. So in general, you can mention that whenever there was this Britain-France rivalry or international rivalries, they brought Royal Military onto the Indian soil, giving edge to the East India Company, right? And you can give example, Carnatic Wars were not fought between Indian, yes, some minor participation of Carnatic Wars, but it was majorly between Britain and France. So look at the years of Battle of Plassey 1757 and look at the years of the Carnatic Wars, 1757 and 1756 to 63. So Robert Clive is using the Royal Military to defeat Bengal army in Battle of Plassey. वो क्या कर रही है वहां पे Royal Military? Why is the Royal Military present India में? Because of Britain-France rivalry. So therefore Britain-France की जो rivalry थी, because of this rivalry, the EIC army was present, and you can give example of Battle of Plassey. You can also talk about Battle of Buxar, 1764. So therefore, their army is small, but when they are getting the help of the Royal Military, so therefore they become better. They get the strength. Third component, battles are not only won by the people who are fighting on the ground. Otherwise, there would not have been any need of any military general. So therefore, political strategy also wins battle. So therefore, next what we can talk about is political strategy of divide and rule. Political strategy of divide and rule. And second component, right, that you can talk about is the policy of building military alliances with the Indian rulers. Policy of building military alliances with the Indian rulers. So this can be your heading of your point. policy of divide and rule, and military alliances. And then you can mention the first point. So for example, here you can mention British made use of disputes within a state and disputes between the states to their advantage. Example, so there you can talk about, so succession, so you can mention this particular sentence, that succession disputes and factionalism created or provided opportunity for the Britishers for the above. कैसे? बहुत सारे examples हैं, depending on the space you choose. For example, if you begin with the first Anglo-Maratha War, 1775-82, so there Raghunath Rao wanted to regain Peshwaship, and therefore he went to the East India Company in Bombay to get help and signed the Treaty of Surat, right? And therefore, as a result, opportunity is being made available to the Britishers to interfere and to start a war, right? So therefore, that is one of the aspects. So you can talk about 1775-82, first Anglo-Maratha War. They don't gain any military advantage as such, but it becomes a reason. So इसको mention करना है कर सकते हैं, नहीं mention करना नहीं कर सकते हैं. But इसी जैसी चीजें बहुत सारी और help करेंगी. For example, and इसको हम end कैसे कर सकते हैं? So this war is being fought with the result of Treaty of Salbai that created a military alliance between the British and the Marathas. So therefore you see, ना रघुनाथ राव गए होते, ना फर्स्ट एंग्लो मराठा वॉर हुई होती, ना ट्रीटी ऑफ सालबाई हुई होती, और ना ही जो है neither the ultimate military alliance would have taken place. So therefore now there is a military alliance between Marathas, and therefore the British East India Company army खुद में तो छोटी है, but now it has support of the Marathas. Second example that you can mention is, for example, Second Anglo-Maratha War. So you can pick a theme since you are talking about Marathas. So Second Anglo-Maratha War, 1803 to 1805. Here, Mr. Bajirao too wanted to regain Peshwaship, and therefore he signed subsidiary alliance with Wellesley, that is with Britishers, right? Plus, just before this particular war, because of a succession dispute, just before this war, because of succession dispute, Gaikwad of Baroda, who is a Maratha Sardar, he also signed subsidiary alliance in 1802. And therefore, one of the Maratha Sardar is now on the side of, militarily he is now on the side of the Britishers because of succession dispute. Then you can talk about, for example, Travancore. So Travancore, 1805, subsidiary alliance was signed. Why? In return for help for suppressing a revolt by Nair troops. So therefore, be it because of politicians or be it because of any other reason, if there was a domestic turmoil, Indian states, they sought the help of East India Company, therefore providing the East India Company with the opportunity to set up an military alliance, and therefore in the subsidiary alliance there is a military alliance also, and East India Company's army, it is stationed and it is paid for by the Indian state, right? So Travancore के साथ subsidiary alliance in return for help against Nair troops का revolt को suppress करने के लिए. So therefore this is an example. Another second component that you can mention within this, policy of ring fence plus policy of subsidiary alliance led to military alliances. Here we mentioned subsidiary alliance with the focus on that factionalism and succession disputes, they are leading to subsidiary alliance, that is a military alliance. Now we can talk about that the British policy of ring fence and subsidiary alliance, it resulted in military alliances which strengthened the East India Company. And here we can mention that, for example, 1765 Treaty of Allahabad, it resulted in a military alliance with Awadh. Then we can mention that because of the fear of the neighbors, Hyderabad signed subsidiary alliance in 1798 because of fear of Marathas and Mysore. Because of fear of Marathas and Mysore. Next, you can mention that they were able to defeat Mysore. East India Company was able to defeat Mysore, especially in the third Anglo-Mysore War and the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, or in general, you can mention that by 1799, the East India Company was able to defeat Mysore because of its alliance with Hyderabad and Marathas and EIC. And therefore, we can write a sentence that because of disunity between the Indian states, because of lack of nationalism, modern nationalism among the rulers, right? Not the people, among the rulers, and power politics and regional rivalries, East India Company was provided with opportunities where it could enter into military alliances, and therefore its own army might have been small, but it is able to take help of Indians to defeat the Indian powers one by one by one. Right? So therefore, this aspect can be mentioned. Then, in general, you can mention that economic capability. So this is political opportunity. In your mind, your answer should be structured political opportunity. Next component that comes into operation is economic capability. So how are you getting the economic capability? So there you can mention that after the Plassey plunder, which began in 1757 and it is continuing till 1765, plus getting new source of income, that is land revenue of Bengal, Odisha, Bihar, via Treaty of Allahabad 1765 after Battle of Buxar, the East India Company now has additional source of income to raise a large army. And plus, in general, you can mention, plus via subsidiary alliance, you are maintaining an army on expense of the Indian states. So therefore, this is an economic perspective. Here, talk about essay only from economic perspective. Subsidiary alliance only from economic perspective. कि मेरा कुछ खर्चा नहीं आ रहा, I am not required to spend any money, but my army is maintained, right, under subsidiary alliance, because the Indian state, they used to pay for it, right. Next component that comes into operation is, you can also talk about sepoys. So therefore, why the Britishers were very successful. So when we are studying for history, there we find out that Mr. Jagat Seth was the primary force behind the defeat of Sirajuddaulah in Battle of Plassey. Why there was such good relationship between Jagat Seth and the East India Company? Because East India Company believed in paying back money taken on loan on time. Right? They knew how to be professional businesses. Whereas Indian Nawab को पैसा दे दो, Indian merchant को पैसा दे दो, timely return नहीं कर रहे हैं. तो anyways, यहाँ पे क्या logic है इसका? यहाँ पे logic है, it is mentioned in the books that sepoys of the East India Company were paid more, plus they were paid regularly. Whereas, for example, in the Carnatic Wars, French, they did not pay their sepoys. They were unpaid for months, which reduces the morale of the sepoys. So therefore, one component that you can mention, that sepoys, they were paid salary, A, more, and second, regularly. So therefore, the morale, loyalty is high. So on both sides, Indian sepoys are there, but this is the difference on the EIC side. दोनों side में Indian sepoys. Second component that comes into operation is, for example, as a student, I have studied about Hyder Ali modernizing his army, converting the army organization into risalas. हर बच्चा पढ़ता है, ठीक है? It is based on the Western model, French model. So fine, Indian armies might be more numerous, Indian armies might be better equipped, but when it comes to military command, when it comes to organization, aspects of clear chain of command. So in this particular scenario, the European armies, they were better than the Indian armies. So you can simply mention this particular point. Then you can also talk about, अब कुछ ऐसा अभी जरूरी, ये लास्ट वाला पॉइंट जरूरी नहीं है मेन स्ट्रीम, बट फॉर एग्जांपल the Britishers, they used to have this. For example, if you read Veer Savarkar's Indian War of Independence 1909, there Veer Savarkar mentions that whenever the British armies, they came with bayonets. Bayonets माने मतलब ठीक है, आपको इतना पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है हिस्ट्री के लिए, इतना थोड़ी डिटेल में पढ़ोगे, बट मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ कि दिस पॉइंट इज बोनस. You want to mention, mention. Don't want to mention, don't mention. Right. So when the British soldiers, or the sepoys on the British side, they came with bayonets. Bayonets means the sword which is attached, the knife which is attached in front of the gun. Right. So whenever they used to fire first, and whenever in close compact they came, so in a column, they would move towards, one by one, they will move towards the opposition army. And this was a big threat, or this was considered as a big problem by the Indian sepoys who were opposed to the Firangis. So therefore, such things. So you can mention that modern weapons, like for example, use of bayonets. फिर एक टेक्निक होती थी इनकी ग्रेप शॉट. ग्रेप शॉट, ग्रेप्स. सो शॉटगन तो पता है ना, शॉटगन, काउंटर स्ट्राइक तो खेला होगा आप लोगों ने. सो व्हेन यू हैव काउंटर स्ट्राइक में शॉटगन, वो दीवार पे जाके बुश करते हो तो बहुत सारी गोलियां एक साथ आती है ना, ग्रेप शॉट. सो अंगूर का गुच्छा, ग्रेप शॉट, दैट मीन्स मल्टीपल बुलेट्स सिंगल टाइम. राइट, वो एक बार लगे तो गए हो. राइट, सो देयरफॉर यूज ऑफ ग्रेप शॉट. सो गन्स विच यूज ग्रेप शॉट. Then during the 1857 revolt, we have all studied that New Enfield rifle, New Enfield rifle, New Enfield rifle. उससे पहले क्या था भाई? कभी किसी स्टूडेंट, आप में से कितने स्टूडेंट्स को पता है कि न्यू एनफील्ड राइफल से पहले क्या था? What was there before the New Enfield rifle? Which gun was replaced by the New Enfield rifle? Brown breast musket. I am super proud of you. Why? This is rote learning actually, ना? People have converted history into rote learning. अरे यूपीएससी टेस्ट द क्यूरियोसिटी. राइट, हम हर बार पढ़ रहे हैं रट्टे में, अपने नोट्स में भी लिखा हुआ है न्यू एनफील्ड राइफल. अरे नेचुरल क्यूरियोसिटी आना चाहिए ना, न्यू है तो इससे पहले क्या था, है ना. सो बट एनीवेज, द यूज ऑफ ब्राउन बेस्ट मस्केट, दिस गन वाज वेरी गुड फॉर द ब्रिटिशर्स, राइट, बिफोर 1857. एंड देन there's something called file firing. File firing mane this. So what the Britishers, they will do, they will organize the soldiers like this, and these soldiers, they will continue to fire here. Right, so आपको लगेगा जैसे वो बाहुबली में दिखाता है ना, बहुत सारे तीर आ रहे हैं एक साइड से. What is file firing? फाइल फायरिंग, या फिर इंग्लिश मूवीज में, या फिर आपने देखा ना ऐसे वो गेम ऑफ थ्रोन्स में ऐसे करते हैं, ठीक है, और ऐसे बारिश हो जाती है, रेन ऑफ तीर होता है. सो इमेजिन दैट इफ इट इज बीइंग डन, रेन ऑफ एरोज, if it is being, thank you, if it is being done with the help of guns. So therefore, let's say in such a column we are arranged and we constantly fire and we are moving ahead. So therefore, constant firing. So this proved to be a big problem. So anyway, but this is a bonus point you may not mention, may mention, you may not know about it, it's okay. But simply you can mention that maybe initially the Indian armies, they were better equipped, but you know, gradually their technology was better. And last point, you can mention some tactical mistakes. What are the tactical mistakes? For example, in the Battle of Buxar, 1764, Mir Qasim, right, who was a good commander, he requested this person, Shuja-ud-Dawla. Shuja-ud-Dawla was this 8 feet tall man, right? His only thing was that, you know, he could lift 2 people with 2 hands, right? तो ऐसा मतलब, ठीक है, Shuja-ud-Dawla. बट वो जितना बॉडी से मोटा था उतना दिमाग से भी मोटा था, मतलब ठीक है. तो मतलब इन द सेंस कि मतलब अब वो मीर कासिम, ही इज टेलिंग मिस्टर शुजा-उद-दौला दैट भाई प्लीज you should follow defensive strategy. That is, in 1761 Battle of Panipat, in Buxar, the Britishers, they were in a fort, right? So simply cut off their supply lines and wait once they are out of their supplies, right? So all preparations had been done as per this defensive strategy, right? That is, once food is not there, they will come out. But then he got impatient. He's like, I am the person who has been victorious in the third battle of Panipat 1761, right? Look at my dole shole. अभी क्या? So therefore, change the strategy at the last moment. So therefore, simply point you can mention tactical mistakes. Example, tactical mistakes. Example, not following defensive strategy in battle of Buxar. Some tactical mistakes. बाकी ऐसे ठीक है, if history is optional तो कुछ fun elements आप डाल सकते हो, जैसे during the second Anglo-Maratha war, right? I'm forgetting the name. I think Holkar of Indore. हाँ, right? Holkar of Indore was marching his army. ठीक है, दिस इज अगेन बोनस पॉइंट, यहाँ पे नहीं लिखा है, मैं आपके पास मजे के लिए बता रहा हूँ आपको. होलकर ऑफ इंदौर वाज मार्चिंग हिज आर्मी टुवर्ड्स दी टू हेल्प सिंधिया और ग्वालियर, एंड देन ब्रिटिशर्स दे हैड कॉट अ लेटर वेयर सिंधिया ऑफ ग्वालियर वाज टेलिंग पेशवा बाजीराव टू दैट वंस दिस वॉर इज ओवर देन विल टेक रिवेंज ऑफ सम डिस्प्यूट विद होलकर. द ब्रिटिशर्स दे ट्रांसमिटेड दिस लेटर टू होलकर ऑफ इंदौर. आफ्टर रीडिंग द लेटर ही मार्च्ड बैक. And the Britishers, first they defeated Scindia, after that they defeated Holkar separately. So therefore, conclusion can be, ठीक है, if you want to be poetic, but ऐसा UPSC में मत लिखना, ठीक है, that, okay, I know, हमें तो अपनों ने लूटा गैरों में कहा दम था, अपनी कश्ती वहां डूबी जहां पानी कम था, ठीक है. So therefore, that is what. So therefore, in the end, conclusion can be that because of disputes, either internal in the form of succession disputes or factionalism, or in the form of interstate disputes because of regional rivalries, opportunities were presented to the Britishers, and they made use of the opportunity, crafted military alliances, and therefore emerged victorious. See, this conclusion can also be your introduction. So therefore, if you are very clear about your answer, the conclusion can also be introduction. Right? मतलब your summary of your answer can also be your introduction. That these are the 4 points that I'm going to cover. अब जरूर नहीं कि आप ये सब लिखें, but at least the theme, the structure should be this, that focus on the organizational aspects, focus on those aspects which are resulting in my army is small, but are there armies who are helping me from Britain, from India, and why are they helping me? Because of Britain-France rivalry, or because I'm hiring them, or here I'm using the disputes. Answer is done. So बस इतना स्ट्रक्चर माइंड में होना चाहिए. एंड इफ यू आर एबल टू फिल 150 वर्ड्स फाइन. इफ ज्यादा हो रहा है, कम करना है, तो इसको 250 में भी आंसर कर सकते हैं उसमें भी. So this becomes the answer. The second question that comes into operation is question number 3. Right. The second question is, why was there a sudden spurt in famines in colonial India since mid 18th century? So first of all, एंग्जाइटी में बच्चा भूल जाता है कि मिड 18th, ये जो अंग्रेज है ना, अंग्रेज, इनका थोड़ा सा देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम ऑफ लैंग्वेज विद देम. अरे भैया मिड 18th, अरे यार तुम ऐसा क्यों करते हो कि -1 करवा रहे हो बच्चों से? तो एग्जाम में ऐसा ध्यान रखना है कि मिड 18th माने -1. ठीक है, मैं जानता हूँ आपके लिए कॉमन सेंसिकल है, बट जब वो ब्लड प्रेशर हाई होता है तो मिड 18th हो जाता है. अच्छा 1850 ऑनवर्ड्स, नहीं वो मिड 19th है, सो -1 करना रहता है. ठीक है, वो आपकी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, वो अंग्रेजों की प्रॉब्लम है. ठीक है, दैट इज प्रॉब्लम ऑफ द English language. So mid 18th means 1750 onwards. Mid 18th means 1750 onwards. So therefore this thing should be clearly in mind that they are talking about 1750 onwards. But they also mention that spurt in famines in colonial India. That means the question wants us to focus on the linkages between the British rule and the famines since mid 18th century, and give reasons. Why was there a sudden rise? So simply the question is very straightforward, right? So here also you see, now as a student, how should I think when I'm there in the exam? It is not necessary that I have prepared these things in my mind already, right? So I'm in the exam right now. So my first thing that comes into my mind is that the two famines which I am very well aware of are 1770 Great Bengal famine, where 10 million people died, 10 million Indians died, 1 crore. And then the Bengal famine of 1943, where 4 to 5 million people died, right? So therefore, see what a beautiful introduction we have. Beautiful introduction. The colonial rule began with Great Bengal famine of 1770, where 10 million died, and it ended with Bengal famine of 1943, where 5 million died. Right? So it summarizes it in one sentence. It tells us that what was the British rule like. So therefore this can become our introduction. Simple, kuch nahi. I'm in the exam thinking like this, right? Second aspect that comes into operation, okay, chalo, they are talking about 1750 onwards. So 1770, Great Bengal famine. Acha, which are the famines? मैंने famines कहाँ सुने हैं? So therefore, okay, Lytton's administration is very much covered by all the books. Lytton, 1876 to 1880. Right, and there we mentioned that when famines were taking place all across India, at that point of time he held Delhi Darbar. At that point of time he did Second Afghan War, 1878 to 1880. That means, okay, in 1870s there were famines. If I'm a good student of history, I might also remember that in 1868 they reintroduced income tax while there was famines in different parts of India. Chalo, fine. So ye wale famines I remember. Then I know that famines are taking place around the time period of 1890s when Bal Gangadhar Tilak was there. Plague commission का जो head था Rand, he was shot dead. So उस time पे famine relief work भी कर रहे थे बाल गंगाधर तिलक. तो चलो वहाँ पे भी हो रहा है. तो ठीक है. Roughly I know that famines are taking place in 1700s. They are taking place in around mid 18th century, mid 19th century also, and they are taking place in 20th century also. Right. So roughly idea. But the question is asking why. Question has not asked me to list down the famines. Why? So therefore, acha, why? So do I know what is famine? Frankly, in my first of my two attempts, or in my first attempt, I did not know what is a famine. Okay, so much amount of English. Okay, so later on I came to know famine. Famine, but what is the logic of famine? Famine is equal to, so what can be your introduction? This can be your introduction. That is, you talk about famine of 1770 and you talk about famine of 1943. Right? So that can be our introduction. Second component that comes into operation is define what is famine in your mind at least. So logically socho. We do not know the answer, but let us logically start thinking. Okay? How to answer questions in the interview, how to answer questions in the mains when we do not know the answer. Logically sochte hain bhai, sabse pehle what is famine. So therefore, then you can mention that basically famine is equal to what? Famine is equal to bad harvest. That is food shortage. मतलब bad harvest plus food shortage कब होगा? Bad harvest है and as a result supply comes down. As a result food inflation takes place. So therefore, if people are rich and they are able to buy that high priced product, then no problem. That means you have to add poverty to it. And third component, fine, if people are rich but food is not there, then there can be a government who is willing to get food grains from some other part of India or from outside the world to increase the food supply. That means a state which is a welfare state. Welfare state or a state which is interested in the assistance of the people. Right? So therefore, lack of welfare state. So if you have bad harvest, plus you have people who are living in poverty, plus if you have a government which does not care about the people, then you have bad harvest can be there in India also today. है तो फिर फायदा क्या हुआ ये सब पढ़ने का? That under the minimum support price, the government of India, the food corporation of India gets so many of food grains, right? Huge amount of food grains are stored by the government of India. Why? Because today we have a state which cares for the people. Even if there is a bad harvest, even if there is poverty, if there is a state which cares for the people, then famine will not be there. People will not die because of food shortage, right? Or food shortage will be compensated. So therefore, first of all, we should know what is famine. Now I get an idea that see, bad harvest we cannot prevent, right? So there can be some geographical reason. So one reason I can mention that because of geographical issues, right? One line, वो तो important भी नहीं है. Second component that comes into operation, poverty. So now let me try to find out that how Britishers, they were not a welfare state. अरे काय का welfare state? Imperial Darbar, Delhi Darbar, 1877, at a point of time when people are dying. War expenditure in the form of Second Afghan War at a time when people are dying. काय का welfare state? ये 2 point दे दूंगा. Welfare state तो prove कर दूंगा that they are not a welfare state. Right? So therefore, then you can talk about that Britishers, they did not care. For example, in 1770, they had looted Bengal so much that by the time period of 1770, when bad harvest was there, the people, they were under poverty. And the East India Company did not do anything for the people. And Nawab was a puppet who was moneyless because every money was stolen by the Britishers by Plassey plunder and by the land revenue after Diwani. And therefore, 1717 famine. Done. So therefore 1770 famine mein you can talk about what? You can say that bad harvest hue, that is fine. But then the welfare state was not there because there was rule of East India Company. Nawab is equal to puppet. Rule of EIC, East India Company, who did nothing. Who did nothing. And plus poverty is there because of over extraction of LR, and plunder of treasury, plunder of state's treasury. So therefore the state is incapable because Nawab is not in power, he is a puppet, and state is monetarily incapable because of this factor. This can be one of the aspects. Second aspect, you can mention that state was not a welfare state, and there you can mention Lytton's administration of 1876 to 1880, whereby famines were taking place. And what you're doing Second Afghan War, you're doing Imperial Darbar, where Queen got corona. Imperial Darbar, where Queen got corona, coronated, Tajposhi. Huge amount of expenditure is taking place for Queen getting corona. ठीक? Imperial Darbar, coronated. ठीक? So therefore this is how we are proving. And then very luckily for us, all the centuries are covered. 1700s, 1800s, and then you see, मैं कोई extra research नहीं कर रहा. I am in the exam thinking like this. And simply 20th century, 1943, you mention that Churchill ensured that food is exported to Europe, as for him European lives matters and Indian lives don't matter. Right? So therefore exported food out of India or out of Bengal. Right? So therefore, and poor management of logistics. So therefore the government is not acting like a welfare state. Right? 150 वर्ड्स ही है मेरे पास लिखने के लिए, तीनों सेंचुरीज कवर्ड है, मजा आ रहा है, मुझे तो पता ही नहीं था इतना आंसर में लिख पाऊंगा. ठीक, नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. राइट, एंड ये बिल्कुल सही है. मेरे नोट्स चेक कर लेना, ऐसे नहीं बनाया मैंने, ये मैं भी अभी कर रहा हूं बिल्कुल फ्रेश, ऐसे कोई स्क्रिप्टिव विक्टिव नहीं है, ये लाइव चल रहा है, लाइव. ठीक. So therefore welfare state common sensically सोचना, we have to think common sensically. And now let us talk about poverty. ठीक है, और poverty के केस में what does Indian history teaches us? तो छाती पकड़ के हाय हाय करने में तो हम सब पता, ड्रेन थियरी, ये थियरी, चे वो तो इतना हम सब कुछ, वो तो वी आर एक्सपर्ट है ना, मतलब इन द सेंस वी आर एक्सपर्ट इन द सेंस कि बुक्स आर एक्सपर्ट इन टेलिंग अस कि वो हमें ऐसे लूट गया, वो हमें फिर ऐसे लूट गया, फिर उसने हमें ये मार दिया. ठीक है, बुक्स ऐसी पढ़ाती हैं. राइट, सो देयर व्हाट वी कैन टॉक अबाउट. सो पॉवर्टी कैसे स्टार्ट करोगे आप? द फर्स्ट कॉम्पोनेंट, पीपल दे डू नॉट हैव मनी टू बाय फूड ग्रेन्स. राइट, so therefore we need to focus on masses, right? And we need to understand that we have agrarian economy, and because agrarian economy, what is the tax in the agrarian economy? Land revenue. And if there is land revenue, then over extraction of land revenue. So therefore किस लिए पढ़ा था permanent settlement of 1793? किस लिए पढ़ा था रियतवारी settlement, right? रियतवारी settlement of 1800. वैसे स्पेक्ट्रम में गलत लिखा हुआ है, 1820 नहीं था ये. फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इट वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इन 1792, देन इट वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड फ्रॉम 1801 to 1807, बट स्पेक्ट्रमाइजेशन ऑफ हिस्ट्री हैज टेकन प्लेस. सो देयरफॉर बिकॉज मुनरो बिकेम governor of Bandras only in 1820, so that is why fine 1820. And similarly your Mehelwari settlement 1822, right? So therefore here you talk about if any student had studied permanent settlement and discussed the reasons for permanent settlement, features, fine, impact of permanent settlement, right? So in UPSC always focus upon the reasons, the why, always be a thinking student. So in permanent settlement 1793, masses were becoming Ryots who are now tenants, who are now landless, who do not have any occupancy rights, who are being high rents are being extracted from them, illegal abovs are there from them, are extracted from them. So therefore, illegal abovs, high rents. So therefore, that leads to and lack of land. That is occupancy rights है नहीं. So therefore, that is one of the aspect that we can talk about. वो आपका next point है जो आप बोल रहे हो, right? So here you talk about the negatives. That is the issue of rents, high rents, the issue of occupancy rights, that is landlessness, and the third component that comes into operation is illegal abovs. The next aspect, Ryotwari. So in the case of Ryotwari, who is the landowner? Ryot is the landowner. So landowner, property owner pays tax. Always property owner pays tax. So therefore here the issue is of high land revenue, that is the tax, right? And because the land revenue is high, so therefore I have to take loan from the money lender, and money lender gives me loan at a very high interest rate, which empties my pocket, right? So therefore indebtedness. And this is the common point with respect to Mehalwari and Ryotwari. And therefore, plus now you add why there is so much need of, bhai Angrez kyun kar rahe hain aisa? Why the Britishers are extracting so much amount of land revenue? So there you mention that irresponsible war expenditure. So they are fighting so many wars. Irresponsible war expenditures. They are fighting so many wars because 70 and 50 onwards, hai na? So until 1857, they are fighting a lot of wars, right? And then, and as a result, for this war expenditure, they need to pay. For war expenditure, who will pay? The people of India, they will pay, right? So therefore, constant war expenditure, it leads to continuous over extraction of land revenue, right? That is the aspect. Then another component that you focus upon when you discuss the drain theory, right? किसी ने drain theory को ठीक से पढ़ा है. So in the criticism of the drain, in the criticism of the Britishers, we mention or we study that the Britishers, they built irrigation canals, irrigation systems only in non-permanent settlement areas. Why? Because in permanent settlement areas, land revenue is permanently fixed. So government ko no faida, no benefit of creating canal infrastructure in permanent settlement areas. I will build canals in those areas where I can increase the land revenue. So in general, chahe point na bhi batao, but in general we can mention that irrigation, lack of focus on irrigation funding. Funding on irrigation was very low. If you remember, ये तो कॉमन सेंस भी है ना यार, है ना? ऐसा मतलब जर्नल भी तो पेल लेते हैं ना, जैसे वो एडिटोरियल वगैरह में है ना, हर एडिटोरियल में लास्ट में लिख दो देयर शुड बी होलिस्टिक सोल्यूशन. नो वंस पापा नोज व्हाट इज होलिस्टिक सोल्यूशन, बट एवरीवन इज राइटिंग 360 डिग्री अप्रोच. अरे कौन सी, अरे पता नहीं, बस है 360. ठीक है, तो ऐसा तो लिख सकते हो. ठीक है, लैक ऑफ, दिस इज कॉमन सेंसिकल ऑल्सो, लैक ऑफ फोकस ऑन इरिगेशन फंडिंग. ठीक है, इरिगेशन अच्छा हो तो और ये कैसे भी पता है कॉमन सेंस कैसे, इन पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस इंडिया एंड इन सो मेनी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया स्कीम्स यू कॉन्स्टेंटली फोकस अपॉन दैट इरिगेशन नीड्स टू बी इम्प्रूव्ड, इरिगेशन नीड्स टू बी इम्प्रूव्ड. सो आज के टाइम पे इरिगेशन का स्ट्रगल है तो उस टाइम पे तो होगा ही ना भाई, तो लिख दो ना पुअर इरिगेशन सिस्टम्स, राइट? सो दैट इज एलिमेंट. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस व्हाट यू कैन टॉक अबाउट इज इरिगेशन. और एक और चीज था, हाँ, कैश क्रॉप्स. So therefore, Britishers, until Industrial Revolution, before Industrial Revolution, they wanted, cash crops for trade, and after Industrial Revolution also, they wanted cash crops as raw material for their factories, so that they can convert this raw material into finished products. So if cash crops are being focused upon, so therefore, another point you can mention that wherever they created irrigation canals, their water was not free. That is, today like we pay for electricity, they used to take money for water rates, high water rates in Punjab, right? Therefore the common peasant was not able to afford the water. So therefore these are the factors because of which you can mention that this thing is happening, right? So therefore हो गया, और क्या चाहिए? और इससे जाके बच्चे की जान लोगे. 5:30 बज गए, 5:15 बजे खत्म करना था मुझे. अब लास्ट पॉइंट, मैं बहक जाता हूँ यार कभी कभी, तो एनीवेज बट समझ के कर रहे हैं तो आई होप आपको फायदा होगा. एनीवेज, लास्ट पॉइंट दैट कम्स इनटू ऑपरेशन इज लास्ट क्वेश्चन, विच इज अ मिक्स ऑफ प्री इंडिपेंडेंस इंडिया एंड पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस इंडिया, एंड दिस इज क्वेश्चन नंबर 11. So when we discuss question number 11, the question is political and administrative reorganization of states. Political and administrative reorganization of states and territories. Political reorganization of states and territories has been a continuous ongoing process since mid-19th century. That means 1850 onwards. Discuss with examples. And answer is to be given in 250 words. That means Jammu and Kashmir tak aana hai. Okay? Now, how should the mind work? See, some of the students, they'll take it for granted and they'll start puking. Okay? Ulti karna start kar. Okay? But look at the question. Two words are there. Political and administrative. As a student, do we know what is the difference between them? And second component, states and territories. Do we know what is the difference between states and territories? So therefore, you see, what will happen is, when political assimilation is taking place, for example, integration of the princely states into India, right? Or annexation of territory after fighting a war. So that becomes political and that becomes territory. Whereas state means you already have like a province and you are changing the structure of that, the boundary of that province, or you are changing the political management of that province in some manner, right? So therefore that becomes the aspect. Another student, he mentioned that, sir, can this question not be from world history? Very valid. Because if you look at this question from the perspective of world history, there is nothing which tells us here that it is about India. But then you look at the Hindi of that question. And when you look at the Hindi of that question, they use the word Pradesh. And from that, we come to know, Are Pradesh, Pradesh to Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. Okay. So therefore, from there we can get, okay, some confusion came, but fine, we have to focus upon, because a lot of new countries also got created by World War I, World War II, and in fact, 1850 onwards, the unification of Germany, 1870, unification of Italy, 1870. But by looking at the Hindi, it is a question of post-independence India and India, right? So this question can be answered from world history perspective also. Therefore, look at the Hindi part for this, right? So therefore, I know that I have to cover annexation. I know that I have to cover administration, right? So therefore, how can I focus upon it? So in the beginning, you can simply mention that British, what can be introduction? You can mention that Britishers, they crafted British India. That is, or you can say India was divided into British India and the 565 princely states, right? In the first 100 years of the British rule, right? In the first 100 years of the British rule, examples, annexations were done through wars against Indian states, mention karna hai kar do, wars against Marathas, Mysore, etc., Sikh, right? उस तरीके से Burma, Sindh, Nepal, right? So in general एक introduction आप लिख सकते हो that how British India got created, because British India के अंदर ही states हैं, British India के अंदर ही states हैं, provinces, right? So definition of what is British India, and second component that you can focus upon is that in 1850s, 1850 onwards है. So therefore, you can mention, for example, annexations by Dalhousie. So this is political assimilation. So annexations of Dalhousie, and clear mention, annexations by Dalhousie, A, via, ये तो हर कोई लिख देगा, doctrine of lapse. Define नहीं करना है, simple doctrine of lapse is fine. Comma, in lieu of subsidy. For example, Berar was taken from Hyderabad in 1853 because it was not able to pay subsidy. Berar of Hyderabad was taken. Anyways, third component, on grounds of maladministration. That is Awadh on grounds of maladministration 1856. So therefore, clear knowledge that on what grounds, on these three grounds, annexations were done, right? So therefore, and 1849 bhi zyada dur nahi hai. So we can mention annexation of the sixth state, 1849. That is with respect to desire for stable borders, stable frontiers. So therefore, we can mention that around mid-19th century, annexations, they were on a rise because of reasons for desire of stable frontiers. Example, annexation of the sixth state for greater British control or greater or empire building by Dalhousie on basis of doctrine of lapse, getting territories in lieu of subsidy, and annexing Awadh on grounds of maladministration. Full stop. Okay. Anyways, next component. छोड़ो, मुझे कुछ next point. ठीक है, मुझे कुछ याद आ गया ना. Anyways, so next point, how do you focus upon? So now you come very fast forward, you come to 1857 onwards, right? So here, for example, you can mention that 1853 charter, although 1857 लिखा है मैंने, but 1853 charter, it allowed for Lord Dalhousie, it allowed for Governor General of India to establish an LG for Bengal to deburden Governor General of India. So therefore, Dalhousie chose LG of Bengal. Right? कौन सी year में? Fine, it's okay. Next component you can mention, under ICA 1861, power was given to the Viceroy to create new provinces and appoint lieutenant governors for the same. Lieutenant governors for the same. Plus, in ICA 1861, legislative councils were proposed. Legislative councils were proposed. New legislative councils were proposed for Bengal, Punjab, and WFP. See, it is administrative. So that's why we can aspect this is administrative reorganization without changing the boundaries. So this point, it can be mentioned. Then next aspect to talk about, that NWFP was merged with Awadh and a province was created, NWFP and Awadh, in 1877. You may remember, may not remember the year, but itna to padke hai, which was later on in 1902 converted into United Provinces. So Uttar Pradesh or Uttam Pradesh before being Uttar Pradesh was United Provinces in 1902, right? And this is for administrative convenience. Next component that you can mention is that after Government of India Act of 1935, to meet communal demands, मतलब ऐसा बंगाल पार्टीशन भी आप लिख सकते हो पहले, चलो ठीक है, पहले बंगाल पार्टीशन लिख दिया, that for reasons of policy of divided rule, plus to appease elite Muslim leaders, plus to weaken the Indian national movement, Bengal, and plus for administrative reasons, because Bengal was very, very huge population, Bengal was partitioned in 1905. However, the partition had to be annulled in 1911, right? Next component that you can talk about is that to meet the communal demands of Muslim League in and on the basis of recommendations of the Simon Commission, after the Government of India Act of 1935, Sindh was separated from Bombay, NWFP was given status of full province. NWFP was given status of full province. Then you can mention, at the time period of independence, at the time period of independence, there were 4 union territories. Union territories को बोला जाता था Chief Commissioner Province. So 4 Chief Commissioner Provinces were there. उसमें Delhi was there. उसके बाद मेवाड़, मारवाड़ was there. Just let me check. हाँ, अजमेर, मेवाड़, अजमेर, मेवाड़. और in general you can mention that there were some Chief Commissioner Provinces, example Delhi. ऐसा करके आप बोल सकते हो. British Baluchistan used to be there. Baluchistan, and another one which you call as your Coorg. Coorg was also there. So these are 4 union territories or 4 Chief Commissioner Provinces which were there. Next aspect that you can talk about is that administrative reorganization में यहाँ पे आप Bengal partition के बाद ये भी बोल सकते हैं that Delhi was made capital. So this is also kind of a administrative reorganization. Delhi was made capital in 1911. That point also can be mentioned, right? Apart from this, in Government of India Act of 1935, Burma was separated from India for administrative purposes. This is also we study as part of regular, मतलब कोई भी कहीं पे भी आप पढ़ते हो, ठीक है, किसी भी किताब से पढ़ते हो, this point is there, right? And then you can talk about biggest territorial reorganization was, और ये किसी बच्चे ने नहीं लिखा होगा most probably, partition of 1947 because of communal forces, right? Division of the whole of British India into India and Pakistan. Then you can talk about that for the purposes of unity of India, integration of 565 princely states. Integration of 565 princely states, which were then merged into, some of them they were kept as it is, like Hyderabad, while others they were merged into this thing. Right? Here also you can mention that with respect to integration of the 565 princely states, two kinds of reorganizations were there, or it was a stepwise reorganization. Step number one was instrument of accession, whereby the boundary of the princely state did not change and the princely state acceded with respect to the three subjects of defense, foreign affairs, and communication. And step number two was merger agreement, where it acceded to India with respect to all subjects. So therefore, this political and administrative reorganization was a two-step process. Next, you come to post-independence India. There you talk about reorganization on the basis of language. First, in 1953, Andhra state is created, and this triggers more linguistic movements for own states, and therefore State Reorganization Commission, it submitted its report in 1955, leading to State Reorganization Act of 1956, which results in creation of many states on the basis of language. On the basis of language, right? Another aspect which you can mention, since we are near independence, अभी थोड़ा सा haphazard हो रहा है, chronological नहीं चल रहा, but अगर किसी student, because just अभी दिमाग में आया, one aspect that you can mention is that territory from Portuguese was taken in Operation Vijay in the year 1961. Operation Vijay. Goa, Daman and Diu, Dadra Nagar Haveli. This is also political assimilation. Then you can talk about from French in 1954 via negotiations. Pondicherry was taken. Pondicherry was taken. So this is also political assimilation. Then you talk about that even within the Constitution of India, there is administrative reorganization. Aha. Kaise? For example, you talk about there is fifth schedule, there is sixth schedule, in one line only. Zyada detail nahi. Because administration to hai na. Boundary chain नहीं हो रहा, administration तो है autonomous districts, fifth schedule, sixth schedule, and then some provisions like Article 370, which that means dealing different states in different administrative manner. One line we can mention because 250 words का है, right? Administratively, this is something different kind of application with respect to certain regions, right? Then we can talk about from Northeast. So 1960 creation of Nagaland is there, right? After that, in 1972. Creation of Meghalaya is there. Creation of Meghalaya, Manipur, Tripura, 1972. And here, what is the demand? There is the demand for autonomy, that is tribal autonomy becomes the reason. Tribal autonomy becomes the reason here. Then we can talk about in 2000, for the purposes of administration, we created Uttarakhand by separating it from UP, and because of tribal autonomy in fifth schedule areas, we created Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh in the same thing. Then in 2014, because of political movement and past desire of a Telangana, we created a separate Telangana. And then removal of Article 370 and consequent establishment of the union territories of J&K and Ladakh. Right? So therefore, it becomes a very factual answer. So I understand that usually UPSC asks more analysis-based question, but I have overshot my time like by half an hour, and people are going to be very frustrated with me. So thank you. God bless you. Take care. Okay. The next teacher will be coming. These are the 3 questions. Answer are given. Okay. Bye bye.